Hey BookTube, it's Angie. So I think I figured out this corner may be the best spot in the room so far to film when I'm doing videos in the middle of the night. It's not perfect, but it's at least not shining directly down on my head and making me look really harsh. It might look a little bit shiny, but I think we can work with it. So today I wanted to talk about, or tonight I guess I should say, I wanted to talk about the theme of the Olympics because I told you guys I am behind after having a lot of sickness around here, so there's going to be a lot of randomness in the next few videos as I go through all these topics that I meant to go through before I got sick. So the book I want to talk about today is Running the Rift by Naomi Benaron. This is about Jean-Patrick Nkuba, who is a boy living in Rwanda, and Jean-Patrick wants to be a track medalist, and he's hoping to get into the Atlanta Games. So this takes place in, when was the Atlanta Games? I know it was the 90s, but I forget the exact year that happened. So like 98 was it? Crap, I can't remember. But yeah, the year of the Olympics when they were hosted in Atlanta, Georgia. That's the year he's shooting for. The way Jean-Patrick gets into running was his older brother is trying out for football at his school, and as part of the training for the football team, his brother has to do a lot of running on his off time, and so Jean-Patrick starts running with his brother. Initially he's doing it for like companionship's sake, but then the longer he's doing it, the more people start to realize Jean-Patrick's really fast. So it starts being an interest of his, and it becomes a big goal of his. While he's starting to pursue this goal initially, his father is unfortunately murdered. This is also during the time when there is a lot of fighting between the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda, and Jean-Patrick comes from a Tutsi family. His father is murdered by Hutu men. So the family moves in with Jean-Patrick's aunt and uncle and his cousins and everybody, and kind of a safety in numbers idea. From there, he just over the years keeps working and trying to get better at his sport, and he ends up winning a scholarship to a nearby boarding school, and from the boarding school a few years later ends up getting another scholarship into the National University in Rwanda. Jean-Patrick's from a small village. I forget the name of the village, but yeah, he's going to the National University of Rwanda. When Jean-Patrick first goes to the boarding school, he's initially told, you know, you are a good runner, but maybe you want to pursue football because nobody really makes a career out of running. It's not really something people pursue. You'd probably have a lot more success with football. And he's like, I don't want to do football. I want to run. So he keeps working at it, and he ends up getting the scholarship to the National University in Rwanda, and his coach follows him over there. And the way he gets into the university is his coach is like, look, I can get you into the college if you agree to attend under a Hutu card or an alias. Well, I mean, it's not really an alias because he's going to use his own name, but he's using a Hutu card under the false guise that he is of Hutu descent, even though he is actually Tutsi. When the idea is first presented to Jean-Patrick, it makes him really uncomfortable because he feels like it's a great opportunity, but if he accepts, he's denying who he is. And he said, I'm not ashamed of who I am. I don't want to shame my family and act like I'm trying to hide them or I'm trying to be something I'm not. And he's really conflicted. So he goes to his uncle, since that's the closest thing he has to a father figure in his life now. And he thinks that his uncle is going to get really upset. And surprisingly, his uncle is like, if it gives you an opportunity to a better life, go for it. We know who you are. We know what's in your heart. It doesn't matter what other people call you. And I remember reading that thinking, that was an incredibly mature attitude for a family member to take. A lot of families here, if you presented them with being something other than what the family would like, you know, a lot of American families, how could you? How could you? So I thought it was very mature that his uncle was like, if it betters your life, go for it, buddy. John Patrick accepts the position at college and has a bit of a realization, because he's gone through life feeling like all of this pressure is on Tutsi people, but then he goes to college and meets this girl B, who is a Hutu girl, and she reveals to him that a lot of Hutu families are under the same kind of pressure, maybe not to the same extent, but she said, we have our own conflicts within our own community. We have people that are threatening us as well within our own community, which was sort of a revelation to him because he thought it was just a Tutsi thing. John Patrick finds a lot of strength in B's belief in him and her own quiet strength she offers him, and just her solidarity as a friend. It propels him to keep going through all these hardships and keep pursuing what he wants to go for. One of the big things I took away from this is it's this whole story about how far would you go when you have this idea or this goal you want to accomplish. What would you risk for that goal? How much does it mean to you? Would you risk your life? Would you risk your family? Just how far would you take it? How much does it mean to you? Just that idea, which I liked that, and I liked that Benaron was able to immerse the reader in these things that John Patrick has to go through. And the reader just gets dropped in his world and his reality of racial discrimination and cultural discrimination and lynchings and murders and abuse and just all these horrid things that we don't like to think about, but they are a reality. So I liked that it forces you to look at that and forces you to think about these things happening to people. They're still happening to people. The thing I did have an issue with this is there was something about the way it was written, though, that felt a little too distanced for me, a little too detached. I did feel like I was in the environment a lot of times, but not all the time. There were certain periods of the book where I just felt like I was sort of half-heartedly watching a movie that wasn't totally engaging me. But there is a lot of really quality food for thought in this book, and it's pretty touching the closer you get to the end when he's gone through all these things and come through on the other side, because he goes through some shit in this book. He has to deal with, I think at one point he has his face beaten in, he has one of his feet broken, to the point where he's not sure if he's ever going to accomplish his goal, but he still tries to figure out a way to do it. There's also something in here about how John Patrick goes through this whole thing about you can go to college, but you have to present yourself as a Hutu to keep yourself safe. And then down the road, when he's finished with college and everything, he gets an opportunity to go to the games as an Olympian for his country, and he's so excited. But now there's this political upset in the country where a lot of countries that used to financially back Rwanda and give them financial aid and vocalize their support of Rwanda, they've been made uncomfortable with a lot of the social and racial injustices that are going on in the country, and a lot of the countries are pulling away and saying, look, if you don't get your shit together, they're talking to the government, not the people, but they're talking about the government of Rwanda. These countries that used to back them are basically saying, if you don't get your shit together and start treating your country people better, we're going to pull out all our aid. And so the answer, the Rwanda's government's answer in this story is to take athletes like John Patrick and put them in the Olympic Games and announce to everyone, hey, these are Tutsi people. See, we let them play in the games. We don't have any issue with them. Everything's cool, guys. And so then John Patrick has this troubling emotion all over again about, like, I just got used to, going through all of this as a Hutu, and now you want me to go back and say I'm a Tutsi again. And it's just the back and forth, that emotional trauma that he goes through was really painful to read, and I just felt for him during that point. But there were parts in here that I was like,
feel a little bit of a disconnect. But it was a really fun read to read through the Olympic season this year. And in the spirit of that, I thought I would also knock out the Olympic tag video, which I think was originally done by RJ at the Secret Stacks, and I just thought I would do a quick run through of my answers for that tag. So the first question is question 1, the opening ceremony. What book did you think had an incredible opening? Very first book that came to mind was Winter's Tale by Mark Halperin. Whether you go with the prologue or the first couple paragraphs is the first chapter, this has an amazing opening and it just carries through. I loved this book, and I loved Mark Halperin's writing in this story. It was brilliant. Just for the writing alone. Question 2 is the games. What is your favorite fictional competition? I was struggling to think of one that really sucked me in. I was at first thinking like actual games and books, like, you know, Harry Potter's Quidditch and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's cute, but I don't know that like it emotionally moved me or anything. But the one that did come to mind eventually was just The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Just the magical competition between the two characters in this book. I remembered thinking up this list. The thing that came to memory for me was the scene where the guy, I think it's the guy that's creating the ice village for the girl, reading that passage of when she first encounters that ice village. I wanted to walk through that so bad. And then like just the back and forth between them trying to one-up each other really carried me through this story. Question 3 is the original. The modern games are based on the original Greek competition. What is your favorite book based on a classic? And I struggled with this a little bit because just in general as a reader, I struggle a little bit with reboots. I'm always interested in them, but they always, well, I won't say always, but a lot of times they tend to fall a little bit short for me from the original. But I did think of 2. They might not be straight up reboots as far as scene for scene retellings, but they're inspired by classics. And the 2 that came to mind were Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. And this is a zombie version of Romeo and Juliet. And then the other one that I read recently was Masque of the Red Death by Bethany Griffin, which was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's story by the same name, Masque of the Red Death. There's very little, like I said, scene for scene likeness to Edgar Allan Poe's story to this. This one has a lot of more like fantastical, almost steampunky elements to it, but there are little glimmers of the original in there. So that was another one that came to mind. And I loved both of those books. Question 4 is The Eternal Flame. What is one ship that you won't let die even after the books made it clear it was never going to happen? I don't get caught up in a lot of ships with books. I think I've said before that I can read a lot of books and like couples when I'm in the book, but there are very few books where the couples linger with me. So I had to think about this a little bit, and my answer might be a little unconventional, but the one that came to mind was, and I'll have to put a image in here because my copy is buried on my shelf back there, and I would have to tear apart my shelf to go get it, so I'm just going to put a graphic in here. But my answer would be Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I remember reading that book, and it's not my favorite classic, but it had parts in it that I liked, and one of the things I liked was the friendship between Rhett and Melanie, I think was the name of the girl, who was friends with Scarlett and was Ashley. I was like, why can I never remember that guy's name? The girl that ended up marrying Ashley, I think her name was Melanie, and there was a friendship that developed between Rhett and Melanie because their mutual spouses were interested in each other. And I remember reading that book and thinking, if you could just put Rhett and Melanie together, I think they would make an amazing couple. But it wasn't meant to be. And question 5, Gymnastics. What's a book that had so many twists and turns it left your head spinning in a good way? And this was the one that came to mind. A Long Fatal Love Chase by Louisa May Alcott. And if you're only familiar with Louisa May Alcott from Little Women, I will tell you now, that is not really her total body of work. She actually has a lot of really dark stuff in her bibliography. She has short stories that have to do with like heroin usage and depression and just really dark stuff. And that's maybe partly why she's one of my favorite classic writers, is just her range that people don't give her credit for a lot of times. But this one has to do with an obsessive love relationship where it starts off really sweet and cooey and romantic, and then it just turns like crazy, and you're reading along with the girl, fearing for her life because dude goes bananas on her, and his story just gets darker and darker, and them together gets more insane. And it's just a short little book, but it's just, I remember the first time I read this, I was like, what? It moved at such a fast pace, and so many twists in his story and his character, and you just wanted to be like, run girl, run. But then he would do these things that would suck her back in and make her wonder, well, maybe he's not that bad. And it was my first experience with even though I didn't really realize what it was exactly, because I read this the first time when I was about 14, 15 years old, and I didn't have enough life experience at the time to really recognize it. But it was, now looking back, it was one of my first experiences of ever identifying an abusive, obsessive, unhealthy relationship, which is funny because I would grow up and experience them for myself. But yeah, this one had a lot of crazy twists and turns for being so short. Question 6, The Controversial Judge. What's a book that you have a totally different opinion about than most other people? There were a couple that came to mind, and again, I'll have to put images up in the screen because I don't have physical copies of either of these books, because I read them and then got rid of them because I was like, but the two that came to mind were The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho and Life of Pi by Jan Martel. And the reason I say those two was I'm not saying they were necessarily bad books or terrible books, just that I didn't have the same experience with them that a lot of my friends were coming to me with. I had so many friends, reader friends, that were bringing those titles to me saying that they were life-changing. And I didn't get that. I got the symbolism and all of that, but I felt like, after I read them, I felt like people were just really reading into a lot of stuff, because I just didn't get the same response a lot of people seem to be getting from those books. I just thought they were decent. Question 7, Beach Volleyball. What is your favorite fictional duo? Again, I might have a little bit of an unconventional answer for this, but the one that came to mind was The Phantom of the Opera, The Phantom and Christine. And actually, sitting here now, I can't believe I didn't think of Belle and the Beast, because I'm always telling you guys that Beauty and the Beast is my favorite story. So I'll put both of them in here. I'll say Belle and the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, and The Phantom and Christine from Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, if you didn't know this was an actual book. Question 9, tell us your favorite Olympic sport. My favorite Olympic sport. What do I like to watch? I like all the sports. My very favorite one, I'm not sure what my very favorite sport is. That sounds mean, but what is that one where they do what is that one that looks so weird when they do it? So it's in the Winter Games where they do like the speed skating that looks like speed skating combined with shuffleboard or something. That one's kind of interesting. But in the summertime, my favorite sport is to watch the high diving competitions, which is funny because deep water is like one of my major phobias. But I'm fascinated with, I guess it's because I have such a fear of it myself. I'm fascinated with people that seem to have no fear of diving from that height straight into water. It's like I have that train wreck reaction of like, I'm terrified for them, but I can't look away. And then the question was, what is a book that you just tore through with world record speed? I'll have to put another image in here because it's a mystery of my library. I don't know what happened to my copy. I swear I still had it somewhere, but I don't know where it is right now. But the one that I could think of was An Instance, is it of the Finger? I think it's Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pierce. I think this book is like something like 1,100, 1,200 pages long, something like that. It's a long book, and it has to do with like the early days of medical science and autopsy and stuff like that in like the 16 and 1700s, and the story progresses into like the witch hunt era of the 1700s, and there's just like a ton of history in it that I just was fascinated with. And even with the size of that book, I tore through that book in about 4 days, and I never read a book that big that fast. As we know, I still haven't done any video for Les Mis because I'm not done with it. So I don't know, I guess it was the right topic in history to keep me fascinated, and there was just that mix of medical science that I like to read about mixed with paranormal and the topic of the witch hunts and all. It was just the right combination that I couldn't put that book down. Question 10, synchronized swimming. What is a book series that you kept reading even though you didn't have any idea why? And I didn't think of an actual series, but I thought of 2 authors that would fall under this, which would be Nicholas Sparks and John Grisham. When I was growing up, I read their stuff incessantly, and then it just dawned on me one day that a lot of the books I was reading were starting to sound very similar. The plots were just getting too repetitive. With Nicholas Sparks especially, I think I've talked before about how I liked his early stuff like Message in a Bottle. I liked The Notebook. I didn't like the follow-up to The Notebook at the wedding. I thought that was just sort of meh. But I liked the Message in the Bottle and The Notebook, those 2 books. Walk to Remember, I thought it was alright. That was one of those ones I actually liked the movie better. And then there was like a string of them I read back to back where it just, nothing was really hitting the mark with me until I read Nights in Rodanthe, and then I loved that book. And then again, everything I've read since then has just been where I'm like, why do I keep picking up his books? All his books, I think there's like 4 that I've actually enjoyed. And I had the same issue with John Grisham. I just devoured John Grisham books in high school because I liked the legalese of it. But again, his courtroom dramas and stuff, they started to sound very similar to me after a while, and I got kind of burnt out on them, but I kept reading them even though they were sounding really repetitive. And then I found that I became more interested in his non-legal stories, but every so often I'll still pick up his old stuff and be like, no, it's still not the same, but why do I keep reading it? That's not to say I won't ever pick up their stuff again still, but that's what I thought of. Question 11, The Tortured Fan. What fictional family, group, nation, organization do you irrationally root for no matter how many times they break your heart? I struggled like crazy to, did I miss one? Oh, you guys, I missed one of the questions. I just realized I was trying to do this in order. Before I get to that question, one of the questions I missed was weightlifting. What is the most massive book on your shelf? So I'll throw that in real quick. And I think the most massive one I have, is this one. And this is the large print edition of The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. And I have this simply because I found this on sale for like $3.99. And it is a book I want to read eventually. So I was like, yeah, why not? It's a brand new hardback for $3.99. But because it's in large print, this thing is like, what? It's close to 1,300 pages long. Is it? 1,240 pages long. So yeah, I think this is probably the biggest book I have in my library right now. Okay, then back to the other one I have. Fictional, family, group, nation, organization. Do you irrationally root for, no matter how many times they break your heart? And I struggled to think of what I had that would fall under this. And the one I settled on was Where the River Ends by Charles Martin. Simply because, there's the thing right on the front. There's a sticker that says, warning, this book could break your heart. And this story has to do with a woman who discovers she has cancer, and it looks like they're not going to be able to fix it. The doctors get to a point where they're like, it's pretty much just make you comfortable from here on out. And her family wants to keep her in the hospital where they can keep an eye on her. And she basically says, I don't really want to go out like that, just hooked up to stuff. I'd rather have one big hurrah. And so this woman who has the cancer in the story, she gets her husband. They've been big rowers in the story. They take a lot of river trips. And she gets him to take her on one last trip down their favorite river and just spend days on this river camping and seeing the sights and all that. And they go through all these adventures down the river. And the reason I picked this one is because you pretty much know from the very beginning how this is going to end, because they tell you the whole point of this story is this woman having to make the choice over quantity of life versus quality of life. So, it's probably not going to have a big, happy, sugar-coated ending, but the married couple in this book go through so many funny and painful and touching adventures throughout this river trip in this book that it was true. That by the time I got to the end, it broke me a little bit, and I wanted it to come out a different way, and I wanted things to be turned around and have the big smiley face on it, even though I knew going in that probably wasn't going to be likely. Each time I kept hoping for some miracle twist in the story. But the funny thing is, I think if I would have gotten that, it wouldn't have been as believable. Because you would have, as the reader, you probably would have been sitting there going, life doesn't work that way, though. You don't get the miracle, magical answer at the end. At least that's what my jaded brain would be saying. But I don't know. I do remember, while I was reading it, though, I kept hoping for that. Even though they were going through all of these, heartbreaking situations, in my mind, I was trying to convince myself it's all going to work out great. So that was the one that came to mind. And then the last question, or the second to last question, I guess I should say, question 12, closing ceremony. What book had an ending that just blew your mind? And that would be The Infidel by Georgia Elizabeth Taylor. This is a historical fiction novel about a woman who, what is her? It's a Spanish woman who is Christian, I believe, and yeah, it's been a few years since I picked up this book, and she is captured by a Muslim man, and in the beginning of the story, she has all of these religious preconceived notions and prejudice thoughts against Muslim people, and she carries that into her getting to know him, because she just sees him as this person who's kidnapped her, and he's an infidel, and so there's a lot of nastiness and hate in the beginning of the story. But the thing I love about this novel is through the course of the story, they start to have these conversations and go back and forth, and realize they're not so different, and throughout the course of the story, they start to learn religious tolerance for each other. And you, as the reader, you get attached to them because you're seeing them emotionally grow and mature and be these really beautiful, compassionate people for each other. And then Georgia Taylor ends it on a freaking bombshell. I did not expect her to go. I mean, I thought something, not like it, but I thought something major was going to happen at the end. I did not expect her to go the route she did. And I picked this book for that question because I remember when I got to the end of this, I was so shattered with the way she chose to close the story of these two, and it bothered me for days. And that almost never happens with me with a book. A lot of times I'll be like, oh yeah, that was a good book. It's only every once in a while I pick up something where it just haunts me for... This book bothered me for like almost 2 weeks, I think, when I finished it. Going, I still have memories of, having those memories where you're like, you're washing dishes or doing laundry or something like that, and then you're getting mad about this book again all of a sudden, like they personally offended you, like, how could you? And then you're fine for a while, and then like a few days later, you're, in the store shopping, or you're, maybe you're like doing homework or something, and then it would come back again. I can't believe that shit. Like, that happened to me for like days on end. I kept going through that. So that's the one I picked for that. And then the very last question just asks, who do you tag? So, I know it's past Olympic season, you guys are over it, but if you haven't done it and you liked the questions and you want to do it, I tag you. And with that, I'm going to close this video, and we'll see you in the next one, guys. Thanks for watching.